They told me this night would change everything, but no one warned me it would feel like stepping into someone else's life entirely. The grand chandelier above the bed cast fractured pools of light across the marble floor, reflecting off the crystal decanters and the silver-trimmed furniture in ways that made the room feel both luxurious and unfamiliar. I clutched the silky duvet to my chest, my palms sweaty despite the chill in the air, and glanced at the man across the room. Vincent Moretti stood near the French doors, his back straight, the tailored suit hugging his frame with an authority that made my heartbeat accelerate. At 65, his presence was magnetic, and his eyes, dark, calculating, almost piercing, seemed to weigh every thought I had before I could even form it. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint hum of the city outside and the delicate ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself this was our first night as a married couple, yet the word married felt heavier than the diamonds around us, heavier than the expensive wood beneath my feet. My gaze fell to a delicate chain resting against my collarbone, a necklace my mother had given me years ago, small enough to seem inconsequential but tethered to memories I couldn't fully escape. That's when Vincent's voice cut through, low, controlled, but with a subtle tremor that suggested curiosity laced with something older. "Where did you get that necklace?" My throat went dry. I swallowed, unsure if I should lie or tell the truth, the room suddenly feeling smaller, walls closing in with unspoken expectations. I tried to answer lightly, "It's just something my mom gave me." He didn't move, didn't blink, his gaze fixed on the pendant like he could see the years it had witnessed, the secrets it held. The air between us thickened, and I felt the pull of his attention as if it were a physical force, nudging me into awareness of the power he carried simply by existing in the room. My thoughts scattered, weaving between fear and fascination, as I noted the faint scar along his right temple, the way his polished shoes caught the light, the subtle scent of cologne mingling with something darker, more commanding. I couldn't help but take a careful step closer, testing my courage against the weight of his stare, and instantly regretted it, feeling the tension coil tighter. The necklace swung slightly as I moved, catching the light and, perhaps, his attention again, drawing an almost imperceptible nod from him. I realized then that the night had already begun to unravel, that the simple act of wearing something personal had triggered the first thread in a tapestry I didn't yet understand, and that every glance, every silence, every calculated motion from Vincent Moretti was a challenge and a revelation all at once. My pulse raced, a mixture of dread and anticipation threading through every nerve, as I stood frozen, the chandelier shimmering above, casting shadows that danced across the room like silent witnesses to a story just beginning. The soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to amplify every small sound in the room, the faint rustle of silk, the whisper of my own breath, making me acutely aware of the space I occupied. Vincent remained where he stood, a pillar of composed authority, his eyes scanning me with a patience that felt both infinite and intolerable. I moved cautiously toward the nightstand, my fingers brushing over the smooth surface, feeling the cold metal of the lamp base beneath my touch. Every step I took echoed slightly against the marble, a reminder that I was not alone in a room filled with both opulence and unspoken expectations. The necklace pressed lightly against my chest, a physical anchor to the past I had tried to compartmentalize, yet now it demanded acknowledgement under Vincent's unwavering gaze. I took a seat on the edge of the king-size bed, careful not to disturb the perfectly arranged linens, and tried to steady my racing thoughts. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, an aroma that seemed to define him even before he spoke. Then, without a word, he moved closer, the floorboards soft beneath his steps, and I felt the subtle shift in the air as if the space itself recognized his presence as dominion. He stopped just a few feet away, the distance deliberate, an unspoken challenge, and the intensity of his stare held me suspended between caution and curiosity. I could feel the quiet rhythm of his breathing, measured and controlled, contrasting sharply with my own, which was quickened by anticipation and uncertainty. My eyes flicked to the balcony doors, to the city lights beyond, and for a moment, I imagined escape, yet the very thought of leaving was tempered by the magnetic pull of his presence. A delicate clock ticked somewhere behind us, marking the passage of seconds with a precision that seemed to mirror his control over everything in this space. I opened my mouth to speak, yet no words emerged that could bridge the gap between the shared silence and the emotions simmering beneath it. Vincent finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate, carrying an authority that commanded attention without raising volume. "Emily, you should know that everything you think you understand tonight is only a beginning." The weight of his words settled around me like a tangible thing, and I realized that the secrets hinted at by that small necklace were only the first layer of a story I was about to uncover. I swallowed, nodding almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the truth that the night would not unfold like any ordinary evening, that the room, the lights, and the air itself were charged with revelations waiting to surface. My hands, still pressed lightly to the duvet, felt both grounded and tense, caught between curiosity and the silent understanding that Vincent was already orchestrating the narrative of the hours to come. Every glance he gave, every subtle shift of his posture, communicated more than words could express, and I sat there, poised on the precipice of understanding, knowing that the night held answers I was not yet ready to fully comprehend, but which I could not avoid discovering. The city lights spilled through the tall windows, painting the room in shards of gold and silver, each reflection dancing on the polished floor as if the walls themselves were alive with expectation. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, the necklace heavy against my collarbone, feeling the gravity of the night pressing in from all sides. Vincent shifted slightly, the subtle movement of his hand brushing against the dark wood of the dresser, signaling a presence that was both close and distant, deliberate yet patient. I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as he moved across the room, each step measured, like a conductor pacing before the opening notes of a symphony. My eyes followed him, noting the slight crease at his temple, the intensity in the set of his jaw, and the way the light caught in his dark eyes, reflecting an intelligence and awareness that seemed to map every emotion flickering across my face. I wanted to speak, to break the silence with words, but the right ones remained just beyond reach, leaving only the shallow rise and fall of my chest to fill the room with sound. He stopped near the chaise lounge, folding his hands loosely in front of him, and the air between us seemed to tighten, charged with the unspoken understanding that each gesture, each pause, carried weight. I felt a pull toward him, a magnetic tension that made the space feel simultaneously vast and confined, my mind racing with questions about the secrets hinted at by his earlier words. The clock ticked softly behind us, each second marking a progression in the unfolding narrative, and I realized that time itself seemed to bend in his presence, stretching moments into something more intense than ordinary life allowed. I shifted slightly, my hand brushing against the cool duvet, grounding myself while my mind attempted to interpret the unspoken. Vincent tilted his head, observing me with a patience that was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable, and I felt the duality of fear and curiosity coursing through me. The chandelier overhead refracted light onto the walls, creating shadows that moved in sync with the tension, and I could not help but imagine the layers of history and authority that he carried effortlessly. "Emily," he said, his voice calm, resonant, carrying an edge of inevitability, "there is more to tonight than meets the eye." The statement, simple as it was, deepened the mystery, and I realized that understanding it would require a careful unraveling of every detail in the room, every look, every breath, every object that might hold meaning. I felt the weight of the necklace again, its chain against my skin, a reminder that small things could carry histories I was only beginning to comprehend. My heart quickened not from panic, but from the awareness that the night had already begun to reveal itself as a carefully constructed interplay of observation and revelation. Each moment with Vincent was a study in subtle command, a silent lesson in patience and presence, and I found myself leaning into the intensity, absorbing each glance, each shift, knowing that every detail mattered, that every second could bring a new understanding, and that the room itself had become a stage upon which the secrets of the past and the present were about to converge. The soft glow of the city beyond the balcony cast long reflections across the marble floor, stretching the shadows in ways that made the room feel both expansive and intimate. I stayed seated on the edge of the bed, my fingers tracing the delicate pattern of the duvet, grounding myself in the physical while my mind raced to catch up with the unspoken tension lingering between us. Vincent remained near the French doors, his posture immaculate, exuding control without a single raised voice or unnecessary motion. His eyes, dark and calculating, never left me, and I felt the subtle pressure of being observed in every shift of my weight, every tilt of my head. I dared to take a shallow breath, noting how the air seemed heavier in his presence, charged with unvoiced expectations and the promise of revelations yet to come. The necklace at my collarbone felt like an anchor to both memory and mystery, a small object that carried more significance than its size suggested, and I could feel his gaze drawn to it again, almost as if he could read its story through the shimmer of the chain and the light reflecting off the pendant. I rose slowly, careful not to startle him, and moved toward the nightstand, my shoes soft against the cool marble, each step deliberate. Vincent's attention remained fixed, a silent invitation to engage with the night unfolding around us. I caught sight of a folded note on the dresser, the handwriting. Familiar yet distant, a remnant of another time, another life, and my curiosity pushed me forward despite the apprehension tightening in my chest. He moved with measured ease, intercepting my path without blocking it, the space between us defined by intention rather than force, and I realized that every motion was part of a conversation we were conducting in silence. I reached for the note, hesitated, and then allowed my fingers to brush the paper, feeling the texture, the weight, the subtle hint of history embedded in it. Vincent inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the action, and I felt the connection deepen, a thread of understanding stretching between us without the need for words. The chandelier above scattered light across the room, highlighting the polished surfaces, the careful arrangement of furniture, and the small details that seemed deliberately placed to communicate a story I was only beginning to perceive. My pulse quickened not from fear, but from the intensity of anticipation, the awareness that the night was orchestrating a series of discoveries that I could neither predict nor control. I inhaled slowly, grounding myself in the sensory details, the cool marble beneath my fingers, the faint scent of leather and polished wood that seemed to radiate from him, the soft hum of the city outside, and the quiet rhythm of his measured presence. Each element contributed to a growing understanding that this night would not simply pass quietly, it would reveal, illuminate, and challenge, and I found myself leaning into the unfolding narrative, ready to observe, to comprehend, and to confront the truths that Vincent Moretti was poised to reveal. The note trembled slightly in my hands as I opened it, and the words inside hinted at layers of history and authority I had yet to grasp, cementing the knowledge that this night, this room, and this man held more significance than any ordinary evening could ever convey. The note trembled slightly in my hands, the paper thin yet heavy with meaning, and as I unfolded it, the delicate script drew my eyes immediately to a series of names and dates, each line a whisper from the past, connecting events I had only vaguely remembered to the present night. Vincent moved closer, the soft click of his polished shoes against the marble punctuating the silence, and I could feel the deliberate precision in each step he took, as if he were mapping the room and every subtle reaction I might have. The necklace at my collarbone caught the ambient light again, reflecting tiny specks that danced across his dark eyes, and I realized that he had not looked away since I first reached for the note. The air between us felt thick with anticipation, charged with the understanding that the revelations contained within that small piece of paper were as significant to him as they were to me. I traced the handwriting with my fingertip, noting the curves and angles, the familiar rhythm of letters that seemed to speak directly to my memory, and the more I read, the more the night transformed into a series of layers, each unfolding with its own tension and gravity. Vincent remained quiet, his presence commanding yet patient, allowing the moment to breathe while the undercurrent of authority and expectation pulled me toward comprehension. I shifted slightly, feeling the coolness of the marble beneath my fingers, the smooth silk of the duvet brushing against my knees, grounding me in the physical while my mind raced through the implications of what I was reading. The faint hum of the air conditioning seemed louder now, each tick of the antique clock in the corner marking the steady progression of a night that promised to reveal truths I had not anticipated. He gestured subtly toward the balcony, and I followed his movement with my eyes, noting the city lights flickering like distant stars, the shadows stretching along the floor as though echoing the tension that had quietly settled into the room. Every subtle adjustment of his posture, each measured breath, each flicker in his gaze communicated more than words ever could, and I found myself absorbing every detail, aware that understanding the full scope of the night required attention to the unspoken. I reached the bottom of the note, my pulse quickening, realizing that the connections between the names and dates mirrored threads of my own life, linking family, memory, and destiny in ways that had previously felt abstract but now carried immediate weight. Vincent stepped closer, the air shifting subtly with his presence, and I felt the magnetic pull of recognition and curiosity, an unspoken conversation stretching between us as he allowed me to process the revelation, each second deliberate, measured, building toward a deeper understanding. I lowered the note slightly, meeting his gaze, and in that brief exchange, I sensed that the night was only beginning, that every object, every shadow, every reflection in this room was part of a larger narrative, carefully constructed and waiting to unfold. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the anticipation in the room, a combination of fear and fascination, as I prepared to confront the layers of truth that Vincent Moretti was guiding me to uncover, knowing that the next moments would shape not just this evening, but the understanding of a past I had never fully known and a present that was suddenly far more intricate than I could have imagined. The note rested in my hands, edges slightly crumpled, and I could feel the weight of its history pressing against my fingertips. Vincent stood near the dresser, his posture unwavering, yet there was a subtle shift in the tilt of his shoulders, a quiet signal that he was ready to let the night unfold further. I traced the letters again, committing each name and date to memory, feeling a strange connection form between the written words and the reality of the room around me. The chandelier overhead scattered fragments of light across the polished floor, illuminating the subtle textures of the walls and furniture, making every surface feel charged with anticipation. Vincent moved closer, each step measured, deliberate, as if he were pacing through the layers of the story embedded in the note. I did not move, only watched, feeling the air between us thicken with the weight of unspoken understanding. My hands clutched the paper tighter, and the chain of my necklace brushed against my chest with every heartbeat, a quiet reminder of the past it represented. He spoke finally, his voice calm yet commanding. "Emily, every piece of this matters. Every name, every date, every choice leads us here." I nodded, unable to find words that could bridge the gap between what I was learning and the gravity of his presence. The room seemed to shrink, the city lights outside flickering like distant stars, mirroring the tension and curiosity that had built between us. I rose slowly, stepping toward the balcony doors, and felt the cool marble underfoot, grounding myself in the present as I absorbed the implications of the note. Vincent followed without haste, his eyes never leaving me, carrying an authority that did not need to be asserted loudly, but was felt in every subtle gesture. I glanced back at the note, seeing the pattern emerge, connections forming between my life and the hidden threads of history Vincent had been silently observing. The air felt charged, electric with discovery, yet calm, as if the room itself recognized the careful balance of control and revelation being enacted. Every detail mattered, the subtle shift of his expression, the quiet tick of the antique clock, the faint scent of polished wood and leather that seemed to define him. I realized that understanding this night required more than observation, it required attention to nuance, to intention, to the silent communication flowing between us. Vincent extended a hand toward the note, and I handed it over, feeling a rush of trust and anticipation as he accepted it without a word. He studied it, his gaze tracing the lines with precision, and then looked up at me, eyes locking onto mine with a depth that made the room feel suspended in time. I breathed in slowly, steadying my pulse, and understood that this was the beginning of an intricate revelation, one that would unfold through patience, observation, and the silent understanding that some truths required careful timing to be fully grasped. The night held its breath, and I found myself leaning into the anticipation, ready to witness the careful unveiling of secrets that had been waiting for this exact moment. Vincent held the note delicately, his eyes scanning each line as though deciphering a code only he could fully understand, and I watched the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his lips pressed together just long enough to suggest thought without speaking. The room felt suspended, the city lights outside casting patterns across the floor that moved with the shadows in a way that made time itself feel fluid. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, the necklace cool against my chest, and I noticed how the ambient light caught the facets of the pendant, reflecting into his eyes as if revealing fragments of a story I had yet to fully comprehend. He set the note down gently on the nightstand, fingers brushing over the polished surface, and turned to face me, the full weight of his presence occupying the space without a single word. I inhaled slowly, attuning to the subtle details, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft tick of the clock, the polished wood under his hands, and the quiet rhythm of his breathing, all of it forming a pattern that my senses tried to follow. Vincent stepped closer, each movement measured, deliberate, conveying patience and authority, and I felt the gravitational pull of his attention, a silent demand for presence and focus. I rose to meet him, heart quickening not from fear, but from the intensity of the anticipation that had built over the course of the evening. The chandelier overhead scattered light across the room in delicate prisms, highlighting the textures of the marble, the silk linens, and the subtle contours of the furniture, each detail contributing to the orchestration of a night that felt like a careful unveiling. His gaze remained fixed on me, analyzing, observing, and I sensed that each moment, each gesture, each breath carried meaning beyond the immediate, a narrative unfolding silently between us. I moved to the balcony doors, drawn by the subtle flicker of the city lights beyond, and felt the cool marble beneath my feet, grounding myself as I processed the layered revelations suggested by the note. Vincent followed at a measured pace, the air around him charged with quiet authority, and I realized that the night was as much about observation and understanding as it was about the truths being revealed. I reached out to touch the railing, the metal cold under my fingertips, and glanced back at him, catching the faintest shift in his posture that suggested readiness to share more, a controlled invitation into the next layer of discovery. The note rested on the nightstand, its contents lingering in the air like a promise, and I felt the pulse of the room synchronize with the rhythm of the revelations, each second stretching to accommodate the growing tension and curiosity. Every subtle detail, the soft rustle of fabric, the reflection of light on the necklace, the quiet authority in his presence wove together to create an atmosphere where anticipation and insight moved in tandem. I understood, in that suspended moment, that the night held more than just a simple unveiling. It was a careful choreography of observation, understanding, and revelation, and I found myself poised to witness the next stage of a story that had only begun to unfold, knowing that the depth of the secrets and the weight of his authority would guide the hours to come with precision and intent. The city lights outside shimmered through the tall windows, casting fractured reflections across the marble floor, and I felt the weight of anticipation settle deeper in my chest as Vincent stepped closer, each movement measured with deliberate intent. The note remained on the nightstand, a silent witness to the unfolding night, and I could not tear my eyes away from the subtle expressions playing across his face as he observed my reactions. The necklace against my collarbone caught the light once more, tiny glimmers reflecting into his eyes, as if drawing him further into the intricate web of my past and the secrets it held. I shifted slightly, feeling the smooth silk of the sheets beneath my fingers, grounding myself as my mind raced through the implications of the names and dates, connecting them to fragments of memory I had long tucked away. Vincent's gaze held me in place, patient and commanding, allowing the tension to build naturally, a quiet rhythm that demanded attention without a word. I rose slowly, the cool marble beneath my feet a stark contrast to the warmth of the room, and approached the note, letting my fingertips brush against its surface once more as if seeking guidance from the delicate lines of script. He followed at a controlled pace, the faint click of his polished shoes echoing softly, and I realized that every aspect of his presence, the precision of his movements, the steadiness of his posture, the unspoken authority in his eyes, was designed to draw out understanding rather than dictate it. I unfolded the note again, scanning the familiar handwriting and the connections forming across its lines, and a quiet thrill mixed with apprehension settled in my stomach as the threads of past and present intertwined. The chandelier overhead fractured the light into tiny shards that danced across the room, illuminating the textures of the furniture, the polished surfaces, and the subtle contours of the space, each element reinforcing the sense that every detail was intentional, every shadow a clue, every reflection a part of the narrative carefully laid before me. Vincent stopped beside me, the air subtly shifting as he leaned in just enough to make his presence undeniable, and I felt the magnetic pull of his attention, not invasive, but commanding in its quiet assurance. I studied him, the depth in his eyes suggesting histories and intentions layered beneath the surface, and I understood that the night was orchestrating a careful reveal, a progression of discoveries that required patience, observation, and subtle engagement. My hands rested lightly on the note, feeling the texture, the weight, the history it carried, and I breathed in slowly, matching the rhythm of the quiet authority that surrounded us. Each moment stretched, charged with potential revelation, and I sensed that the next action, the next glance, could shift the understanding of everything I had encountered so far. Vincent finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate, and unwavering. "Emily, some truths reveal themselves only when you are ready to see them," and in that instant, the room seemed to hold its breath with us, the balance between past and present, secrecy and disclosure, resting in the suspended tension that connected us both. The room was silent, yet the tension vibrated in every corner. As though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next movement, the next word to unlock what had been carefully hidden. I held the note loosely in my hands, the paper slightly worn at the edges, and I felt the significance of each line settle more firmly in my mind, connecting fragments of the past with the intricate narrative of the present. Vincent stood near the balcony, the faint glow of city lights outlining his silhouette, his posture calm yet commanding, exuding a presence that made the space feel simultaneously expansive and intimate. I stepped closer to him, drawn by curiosity and the subtle promise of understanding, each movement deliberate, my shoes whispering against the marble, echoing faintly in the vastness of the room. His eyes met mine, dark and calculating, but softened by a depth that suggested awareness and patience, and I realized that the night had become a study in observation, revelation, and the quiet negotiation of trust. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words faltered under the weight of the accumulated tension, leaving only the sound of my own breath filling the space between us. Vincent tilted his head slightly, acknowledging my hesitation, and the corners of his mouth hinted at the faintest shadow of a smile, not playful, not teasing, but rather an acknowledgement of the careful dance unfolding. The chandelier overhead scattered light across the polished surfaces, creating patterns on the floor that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the unspoken narrative, highlighting textures and shadows that had previously gone unnoticed. I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingers against the railing of the balcony, feeling the cool metal against my skin and the expanse of the city stretching beyond, a reminder of the world outside and the depth of the story within these walls. Vincent moved closer at a measured pace, his presence a silent guide, and I felt the magnetic pull of understanding growing with each deliberate step, the space between us charged with anticipation and reflection. The necklace at my collarbone caught the light again, glinting like a small beacon of the past, drawing our attention to the continuity of history that bound the present night to memories I had only just begun to understand. He extended a hand toward me, not demanding, not pressing, but offering a gesture of quiet authority and connection, and I felt the weight of the moment, the significance of trust, and the promise that the revelations of the night were unfolding with intent and precision. My gaze followed him, absorbing every detail, the subtle shift of his expression, the calm in his movements, the quiet certainty that he carried with him, and I understood that this night had been designed to reveal not only secrets, but insight, patience, and the layered complexity of understanding. I inhaled slowly, steadying my heartbeat, aware that the moments stretching before us were both an invitation and a challenge, a careful orchestration of discovery, and that the next step, the next glance, the next subtle gesture, would continue to guide me through the intricate web of history, truth, and quiet revelation that Vincent Moretti had so meticulously prepared.